What happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370? Theories are abound about the fate of the flight that vanished more than a decade ago. But what do we actually know? This week, the Jackalopes will explore Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. I'm Floyd Whiting.
I'm Aaron Linden.
I'm Steve Sisson.
And we are your Jackalopes. Emmy's out this week. She's visiting family. And I just want to say that this event involves the possible and probable deaths of 239 souls. We can only guess as to what happened to these people. But I do want to acknowledge that families are still in mourning and still searching for what happened to their loved ones. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was an international passenger flight operated by Malaysia Airlines that disappeared from radar on the 8th of March, 2014, while it was flying from Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia to its planned destination of Beijing Capital International Airport in China. The cause of its disappearance has never been determined. It remains the single deadliest case of aircraft disappearance in all of history, and with 239 of the plane's occupants presumed dead. I can remember when this happened. The questions about how long did we search for it? We searched for that thing for so long and found absolutely no evidence of it. And recently, I can't remember the year it came out, but it was rather recent, right after I think the plane disappeared. One video surfaced with more of an infrared look to it and three objects, circular in shape, from what I could tell. They looked more like orbs than anything else, were in a circular pattern around the plane. That's all that footage really showed us. Recently, and I don't know when this next video came out, but there's one with two screens side by side. There's an individual going around telling people that this is from a spy satellite because the spy satellite is designed to take these images on two separate cameras and maybe even more to create more of like a 3D type of image for our spies, our CIA, our NSA, things like that. Now, this video shows a plane far off in the distance, kind of like you're seeing it from space. The angle always looked weird to me, though. I do want to say that. It looked like it was filming it more from the side. But it shows these objects next to this small image of a plane that's flying through the air in a very erratic pattern. These little orbs show up and they start flying around the plane, but then they synchronize, and after they synchronize, they begin to spin around the plane, and then the plane pops out of existence with a flash. A lot of people are saying, this is real. So last night I started a more deep dive into that. And there's individuals out there who have spent a lot of time. There's one guy who actually copied the whole thing in less than 30 minutes and made it look almost exactly like that. So the reliability of footage, as we all know, and this is something that we talk about all the time, is so difficult. Is it real? Is that footage real? Is that picture real? And it's getting harder and harder to determine if something is real. Now, on the other side of that coin, if this satellite footage was leaked, first off, who leaked it? Because satellite footage from spy satellites is probably one of the most guarded secrets in the United States of America.
Anywhere.
And it should be. So who leaked it? Who'd they leak it to? How did it just end up in the nether?
They leaked it to YouTube.
Right? Yeah. How would that happen? Right? Without somebody knowing.
Right.
It, Joe Schmo is the only guy who has access to that.
Yeah.
Or Joe Schmo and his team. So someone on Joe Schmo's team is going to jail today. So how would it get out, first off? But let's say that it was. Let's say that that's real. What does it mean? It means that 239 individuals were taken by an extraterrestrial force in some way. It would be the largest abduction of human beings on record and maybe ever. 239 people.
All at once, too.
All at once.
Yeah.
Why would it happen now? Why this particular flight? Why was it chosen? Why was the spy satellite watching the plane? Was the spy satellite watching the objects, and the objects went to the plane?
Yeah.
Or was the
And they
spy
just
satellite
happened
watching
to
the
catch
plane
that?
and
Yeah.
just happened to catch it, right? So there's a lot of questions linked to it. After watching other videos of kind of these video tech guys who are really good about this stuff, I don't think it's real. I think this is just something that was created by somebody to be put out there in the nether, to create, I don't know, pandemonium, conversation, conspiracy theory, an explanation to what happened. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Steve first, and we're going to learn what we actually do know.
Okay. Well, the thing is, like, the data and the evidence is pretty minimal, because this thing, it vanished, and it's been more than 10 years, and we still haven't found it. But I guess we can kind of construct a timeline of what we do know. It took off, and there's some interesting stuff happening there. The flight was kind of a training flight for the first officer. He was moving up to the 777. He only had like 40 hours of flight time on that plane. The captain had 8,000 or almost 9,000 hours on the plane. So he'd been, had a lot of experience. He was definitely the senior officer among the two in there. So the first officer was doing a lot of the flying. The captain was doing a lot of the talking on the radio. And of course, there's always there's the famous good night message that got broadcast all over the place, because that was the last transmission from them. And then I think it's within 2 minutes after that, things start to become anomalous. It's flying on its path. Everything looks normal. Right after that good night message, within 2 minutes, the plane makes a 180-degree turn, and it's a sharp turn. It has to be a turn that was done by hand, not through an autopilot.
Right.
It's too sharp for the autopilot to allow it.
And Grant actually has a photo of the flight path, so we can put it up here by Steve someplace.
It's just
so you can
really
in front
see
of
it.
Aaron's face.
Yeah, just cover me up.
So it makes a 180 turn, which obviously that's not part of the flight plan.
Yeah, and why would he do that?
Yeah, and there was no radio transmissions or anything like that. At that same time, transponders get turned off. All communication stops. Not just transponders, but background stuff like satellite communication. That was
Everything.
The ACARS satellite system. All that stuff stopped talking, which means those systems had to be powered down or lost power. But I would think if there was some sort of systems problem that caused the power to be lost, they would behave differently than they did. Radio transmissions would probably still be possible, and they would do some maydays or something like that.
Right.
It definitely seems like, based on what communication was still happening, there were still pings happening to the satellite, but not for like an hour and 17 minutes or something like that. And they will ping every hour if nothing else is going on. That stuff was powered down, and it looks like it was deliberately powered down. The transponders were shut off. The systems were powered down. They probably even shut down all of the auxiliary stuff, so only the ram air turbine was actually powering the basic critical flight systems to keep the plane going, and everything else was shut off. It makes that 180 turn, which had to be done by hand because it's too tight for the autopilot to do it. And I think the reason for that was there is military airspace to the northwest of that area, and they wanted to stay outside of that military airspace. If they would have allowed the autopilot to make that turn, it would have been wide enough that it would have gone into that airspace. So
it could have been a precautionary measure, like a logical reason to flip it around.
I think so, and to flip it as tightly as they did.
Or it could have been they weren't powered down. The transmission was interrupted by aliens.
Yeah.
So I got a question.
And the aliens didn't want to go over to the military base because You don't want to go over the military base if you're alien.
Why?
Why-
Yeah. That's
what
true.
was the initial problem? Why, from point A to point B, they had a flight.
Mhm.
They
It's
had
like
a flight plan.
5.5 hour
About a
flight.
5-hour flight? Yeah.
Why were they not on their flight plan?
That's a question. Now the good night thing is the kind of the where all that stuff obviously starts to become abnormal. But I think there was actually some indications before that, about like maybe even 20 minutes before that, that maybe, this is all speculation, that maybe there was something going on with the captain. I have the audio transcripts of this, and we'll have Grant fire this one up. So this
Drop 'em in
first
there.
one, I got to look at the time on it. This is 1:01 and 14 seconds. The diversion, the 180-degree turn, happened at like 1:21 in the morning. This is 1:01 in the morning. Grant, go ahead and play that first audio.
Malaysian 370.
So this is at 1:01 and 14 seconds. This is an unusual transmission to make. He doesn't have to make this call to ATC. All he's doing is saying, hey, we're here doing what we're supposed to be doing. Basically just checking in. Was on his way out of that airspace, so there's really no reason for him to call up and say, hey, here we are. Kind of an odd thing, maybe just a courtesy thing for ATC, just saying, hey, we're at our flight level, we're here, we're maintaining, we're on our way. But about 7 minutes later, he makes the same call again. Go ahead and play clip 2.
370 maintaining level 350. Malaysian 370.
And ATC confirms it just with the standard, Roger, I've got your message. Kind of weird that he would make that same call again 7 minutes later.
Right.
And if you listen to his voice in those two calls, I think you can kind of notice a difference in his tone a little bit between those two. Go ahead and play clip 3. This is those two calls back to back.
370 maintaining level 350. 370 maintaining level 350.
The first one, he sounds really calm and relaxed, just standard. This is what you want to hear from the guys flying the plane. Just everything's normal, routine. We're in our zone. Everything's cool. The second one, he doesn't sound stressed or anything, but he does sound more like there's more energy.
No,
maybe.
yeah, he's like 370. Like,
Yeah.
it sounds a little hurried.
Yeah, he's talking more rapidly. His pitch is higher. And why would he make that call again 7 minutes later? It's like he was distracted by something else going on and wasn't monitoring the frequency. You would call in and check again just to make sure you didn't miss anything when you were away. That could be why he's making that second call. It could be just he forgot he made the call the first time, but it wasn't like one of those routine or standard things that you have to do. This was just a courtesy call. So, but the difference in his tone between those two, I think, may indicate that there was something going on in those 7 minutes that was taking his attention or causing him to, get a little more energetic. And then if we listen to the final call, this is the famous good night one. This is clip 4.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night. Good night, Malaysian 370.
He still sounds pretty rapid in that message. So like he's more energetic. There's more going on in his head or something. So is there something in the cockpit that's causing him to, have to divert his attention to something?
Something outside the cockpit?
Yeah. Is it something outside the cockpit? Is it something in his head? Was he like getting ready to implement his plan? All sorts of speculation we could do about that.
And this is the lieutenant who was working his way up, making these calls, or this is the captain?
That's the captain
That's the
making those
captain,
calls.
with
right.
8,000 plus hours on this plane.
Yeah. So I think that, that's something that the report doesn't say there's anything significant about it other than it's an anomalous call. They don't say that there's anything. They said they didn't detect any stress in his voice or anything like that. And he doesn't sound stressed. In fact, when you hear that good night one on its own, you don't think anything of it.
Yeah.
It's only compared to that first call where he sounds much more relaxed.
Right.
That you start to kind of think, well, maybe he's heightened in some way in those last couple of calls. And then right after that, within 2 minutes, he starts making the turn. And then he starts flying completely off the path.
Then it's not a good night because
Right.
nobody knows
So,
what the hell
so up
happened.
until that point right there, everything was normal. He was on the correct flight path. Everything was going the way it was supposed to go. And then he makes a turn.
Yeah, and the systems get shut down on the aircraft. And the turn is a 180 turn. And we know that because there's still primary radar contact at that point. The transponders are shut off, which means you're not getting that detailed real-time information about altitude, speed, and all that stuff. You're just getting primary radar contact. But he's still in areas where there is radar going on, and they can track it that way. You don't get accurate speed or altitude, but you can kind of tell where he's going.
Until he crossed over came back, crossed over Malaysia, and headed out to sea. And then the military radars were picking it up until they got outside of that.
And there was like sporadic contact in there. Now, the timing of this, it's right when he's being handed off from one controller to the other. So you've got to know that there's a little bit of a gap in there where they're expecting you to call this next frequency that he tells them to call at Ho Chi Minh. And, of course, they're just going to wait for him to contact. So he knows he's got some time in there. Whoever's doing this maneuvering knows that's the perfect time to do it. You're being headed off from one controller to the next. There's going to be that gap in there where they're not really paying close attention to you. The turn is tight enough where you're avoiding the military radar. It had to be deliberate.
So you feel that somehow, for some reason, the captain made these adjustments himself.
I don't know. I mean, he would be the first suspect, I would think. But when you look at all the, his background and everything, there's absolutely no indication that he was in any kind of place in his life where he would want to do something crazy like that.
And in fact, in the investigation, they even went to all the crew members' homes and went through everything and detailed financial information to make sure nobody
no
was...
major debt.
No major debt.
No crisis in the families.
Right, crisis. Life insurance policies hadn't been taken out in the last 6 months. Any of that stuff, which just lends more credence to what the hell happened. Because
Why would this take
nobody
place?
necessarily within the crew would have been motivated to take the plane out.
What about failed hijacking?
Maybe, but I would think at that point you can squawk the hijack code on the transponder rather than, unless the hijacker knows enough about this to say, with a gun to the guy's head, don't
You touch
do
that
it.
box,
Yeah.
you're going,
But
Right.
then I think they would have maybe detected more stress in his voice at that point.
yeah.
But you also have to keep in mind, I mean, it's 2014. It was well after the events of 9/11,
Right.
so there was a lot more security and that kind of stuff. Now, for anybody that's gone through like foreign countries, and I mean, you're going through customs, you're going through a lot of security. So for the ability to have somebody on there that could hijack it, I mean, that is one of the theories, but man, that'd be pretty tough.
Yeah, and they looked at all the passengers in detail too, and the only thing that they saw that was unusual was 2 Iranians with false passports, I think. But they don't suspect there's anything going on other than them trying to seek refugee status.
So
We're
not
getting
that they
closer.
not that they were like members of a cell in any way that they could tell.
No.
And I'm sure that was investigated to the absolute ends. But maybe they were coming from Iran. They had escaped. They were looking to get into China, maybe claim
Asylum or something.
asylum somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know how the Chinese government
Yeah.
handles that, but so there is a hijacking hypothesis out there.
It's
where
not
people-
off the table, I guess.
Yeah.
It just seems highly unlikely. But so does everything else.
Right? Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like hijack has as much credence as UFO. Like at this point, because there is nothing.
Yeah.
So was anything ever found? A floating piece of debris, maybe a life jacket.
Part of what they think was one of the what is it? The foilan?
The flaperon.
Yeah, flaperon from a wing had washed up in Africa. But then there's conspiracy theories around that was actually planted there by a terrorist cell, saying, "Oh yeah, this is part of it." And it's interesting, in all the research, it says, things like 20 pieces of debris believed to be from the 9M MRO had been recovered from the beaches in the Western Indian Ocean. However, reports state that the first items of debris to be positively identified as originating from the flight were the flaperon. Well, which is it? Believed to be or positively identified? And all of these reports, and I mean, they spent $155 million
looking for this
plane and the investigations. And in the reports, there's all these inaccuracies. Like, well, we believe, it was positively identified. Well, which one was it? It never
Who was in charge of the
clarifies.
reports? Who wrote?
Finally, in the end, it was Australia. Australia took charge of the whole thing and was like, we're heading this up. Because there were over 12 countries that were involved in the start of this. It was a 3-year and most expensive search in the history of aviation, 155 million, when they covered 46,000 square miles of ocean, never finding the aircraft. 12 different countries were in on this thing. And it's bizarre because of the passengers, 153 were Chinese, including a group of 19 artists. They were actually in Kuala Lumpur, which is just fun to say.
Right.
For a show. And 20 passengers, 12 of whom were from Malaysia. This is the interesting part. Were employees of Freescale Semiconductors. Which is where we kind of get into the next fun part of the show, is Freescale Semiconductors actually made... This is so weird. They make these tiny, tiny, tiny parts for drones. The only parts for these drones were in the cargo hold of this flight. The people that worked for this company had these things with them. They were charged with getting them to China because they didn't want them to fall into the hands of
Iran?
the Iranians.
Wow.
And the two dudes that are on the plane with fake passports and fake credentials are Iranian. Weird.
That is interesting.
The other weird thing is they had 2.2 tons of cargo listed as radio parts and chargers, but they never, ever, in all the investigations, identified specifically what those were. They were these parts, supposedly.
I remember them saying something about lithium-ion batteries.
And
being
there
in
were 487 pounds of lithium-ion batteries, which...
400 and what?
87 pounds
Of lithium?
batteries,
On
which you
that
can't
plane.
take on planes.
No.
Yeah, they said that they were packaged in such a way that they weren't considered to be hazardous.
Right.
But I don't know what that means.
I read troves of things on this, and no one has any conclusive evidence, descriptions. They just said 487 pounds of lithium-ion batteries packaged in a way that would keep them from doing what they do. And lithium-ion batteries, as you know, if you've ever watched those videos, you can't put that out. Throwing water on it just makes it worse.
It makes its own oxygen, so...
The craziest part, though, is years later, a French investigator that lost his wife and children on this flight discovered that 89 kilograms of load was added to the cargo list after the plane took off. And so for those of us that are not imperial, that's 196 pounds. Could be a person.
Yeah?
Really?
So he dug into it and found that, according to an article in The Sun that was published, there were also different versions of the flight's passenger list that did not match what was in the reports. So the theory there is you've got somebody on the plane that shouldn't have been there, that was not on the passenger list, that hijacked the plane to steal these small devices
steal
for
tech.
drones
Yeah.
to take to the Iranians.
Okay. I could see that.
It's a theory. But I have the top 12 conspiracy theories surrounding the flight. Number 1, alien abduction.
That's the top?
Aha! Yeah. I input Planet Serpo. If you don't know what that is, we should do a show on that. True story. So it says on the cover of the book.
Most of them do.
Yeah. So this theory suggests that space aliens are behind the disappearance of the flight. It has been claimed that some passengers' cell phones could still be called after the flight disappeared, but showed no midair explosion. Going back, though, where was... I had something in here that was so weird. Malaysia Airlines. I found this to be really strange. Malaysia Airlines issued a media statement at 7:24 on March 8th, an hour after the scheduled arrival time of the flight in Beijing, stating that communication with the flight had been lost and that the government had initiated a search and rescue operation. However, unbeknownst to the investigators of the airline at the time, Flight 370 was still airborne.
Yeah.
At
So they
that time,
activated search and rescue.
before the plane ever was actually out of the air.
Do we know if the communications that you've shared with us are the only ones that were made?
I think that's pretty well accepted. Yeah, the ACARs, the satellite pings, that's how they found the search area, and that's based on there was still some very rudimentary satellite communications happening between the aircraft and a satellite, just a handshake basically, and nothing else.
So this isn't like NASA where they can be like, hey, switch over to the doctor line, where I think astronauts are allowed to speak directly to their doctor and it's private.
Yeah, I think it's not. I guess it's not completely outside of the realm of possibility.
If they were
but
like, I got a situation, I need to speak with someone. If there's like maybe a line or something that's always open,
Dark channel.
a dark channel, just in case if things go wrong, and I don't want people knowing everything.
I guess
if he
you could
have switched over.
You could theorize that in that 7-minute gap between those two calls, that he switched frequencies and was talking to somebody else. Maybe. Yeah, I think the satellite pings give us an idea of where the plane ended up, and that it was in the air until it ran out of fuel, because of how long those pings continue.
How long did this thing go off course, or how far did it go off course?
Well, it had 7 hours worth of fuel, I think.
Right.
And
so
it flew for all 7 hours.
The load needed to get to Beijing was like, I think it was like 80,000 pounds of jet fuel, and it was loaded with 108.
Yeah, enough to give them a couple extra hours than what they should have needed.
Right.
Just in case there's a holdover.
Right.
It's common. Yeah.
So, number 2, MH370 and MH17 were the same plane.
Oh.
Yeah. So, if you don't know about that, this theory suggests that the plane that crashed in a field, it was actually shot down by RUS. Anyway, in Ukraine was the MH30 flight and not MH17, which was scheduled to depart from Amsterdam and arrive in Kuala Lumpur. The plane was shot down in a military exercise in the South China Sea. This theory also claims that the search and rescue efforts were deliberately sent in the wrong direction as part of the cover-up. Third, and kind of fun, Asian Bermuda Triangle. Theory suggests that the area where MH370 vanished is on the exact opposite side of the globe from the Bermuda Triangle.
Ooh. Interesting.
And I looked into that, and it is, which is kind of creepy.
That is.
I don't buy the Bermuda Triangle, though. That's why we've never done a show on it, because if you actually look at the average disappearances across the world, the triangle gets no more, no less.
Yeah, but it's still scary.
It's just that it's right there.
CIA's behind it, duh. Theory suggests that in this day and age, there's no way a plane could just disappear, and the American CIA is covering up something that it does not want the public to know. Back to the technology, perhaps.
I feel sorry for those guys.
The CIA?
Yeah.
As a scapegoat
Man,
for everything.
it's a scapegoat for everything.
Yeah.
These guys are doing their best to
Right.
make sure that democracy and the Republic of the United States continues on, but everyone's just like, well, they're just so evil. Look, they've done some bad things. I'm not saying that they haven't, but what I am saying is, like, if you're just a regular agent, and your family knows about it,
You start
family
telling
barbecues, everyone's like, hey, Tell me, who killed JFK?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
dude, I don't know.
You're like, dude, I'm just gonna say I sell used cars.
Yeah,
At that
exactly.
point. Like, I don't
Exactly.
want anyone to know.
I don't want no one to know what I do
No.
for a living. It would just be so horrible. Everyone blaming you for everything all the time. I mean, it
you're
is.
one of those guys.
It's a scapegoat for everything,
Yeah.
right?
9/11 style hijack mission. Theory suggests Israeli agents plan to crash the Malaysian Airlines plane into a building and then blame it on the Iranians. High-tech hijacking. MH370 was the product of the world's first cyber hijack, accomplished by accessing the airplane's flight computer and reprogramming the speed, altitude, and direction of the plane.
Is that even possible? Like, in reality? Because here's my deal. Everyone says, oh, I'm going to hijack it. that joystick is still attached.
Yeah.
There's still an analog system in these things. I could just switch it off and then just take control of the plane.
Well, especially
myself.
in the Boeings where they still have the yoke.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think flying at remote control, unless you've got a bunch of specialized stuff installed in there, I don't think it's possible.
It's a feasible thing.
I don't know. Cracks in the plane. Slow decompression of the cabin left the pilots and passengers unconscious. They would not have been able to detect this in order to put their oxygen masks on in time, and passengers would not have been able to really feel the oxygen deprivation until it was
slowly,
too late. Right. Which I will tell you.
That one.
I was on a flight over the ocean coming back from Puerto Rico. I have a photo of it. Maybe I'll give it to Grant. Of me with the mask on because we lost like a seal. And I'll tell you what, when they're not kidding when they say put yours on first and then help those around you.
Yeah.
Because within moments that thing comes down and they're like, pull it toward you.
Right.
No, there's like a freaking zip tie on that thing and you got to like break it.
Really?
It doesn't just quietly pull toward your face. But so there's this gal next to me and she's like losing her shit. So I'm like, I will help you. So I'm like, bam! I finally get it to, and I'm like, hi.
Oh, you didn't put yours on
No.
first? Oh, wow.
So
and you were
it-
already
like-
out of it.
Yeah, and so it's like no bullshit
Yeah.
when they say
Wow.
do these things
Hypoxia kicks in quickly. And you don't know what's
Well,
happening.
You're
You just-
30,000 feet, for God's sake. I mean, and then you're at 10,000 feet, so that's what they pressurize a cabin to.
So that is a very real possibility.
It is.
It
yeah.
is, and it's probably, I mean, I love the alien thing, and I love the alien video.
Yeah, I love to think that these people are living on some foreign world. Being
Right. I
treated
think it's super
very
cool,
well. Yeah, but
and I hate debunking alien stuff, but yeah, the guy kind of recreated it, and it came out in like 2015, but technology was still pretty decent. But who filmed it? Spy satellite, really? Okay.
yeah, right. Yeah.
And all there's just so much about it, and then when it just goes poof, into the ether.
Yeah, we kind of know that didn't happen.
Well, so one of the guys that I watched that was debunking that video was actually like, God, I've seen that somewhere before. And he was a tech guy that likes UFO stuff, but he tries to really watch with a fine eye and either say, you know what, this is pretty good, or it looks faked. He remembered seeing some stock explosion footage from like 2009 program, went back, found it, and it basically the pattern of it was exactly the same, and then he just colorized it to the same thing as what was in the video, and he's like, it's a fingerprint match.
there you go.
So,
there you go.
I don't know.
that's too bad.
Debunked, folks.
Sorry.
Debunked.
I'm sorry. So actually, the hypoxia is one of my more favorite theories, just because it makes more sense, but it doesn't explain the erratic flight pattern.
no, and for how long that went on. Like
Right.
after the 180, there was enough radar tracking for quite a while that it was making turns and
Yeah.
flying in specific directions that wouldn't fit with that theory.
What if it makes you feel almost drunk, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I think that's
and you just
you get confused.
you almost it was almost to the point of you just passing out. If
And
you've
you're
ever
over-
passed out.
You're over the ocean,
Uh-huh.
which for those of us who've flown over an ocean, when you look out that window,
Well, there's
it's-
nothing but water.
There's nothing but water. There's no sense of direction.
Right.
There's no landmarks that you can be like, okay, that's here. I need to turn this way. So if he had hypoxia, he was trying to save everybody on board. Let's say that this actually happened, and he starts to pick up on, hey, something's going wrong.
I'm getting a little loony.
I'm getting a little loony. And so what if something was wrong with the oxygen masks themselves and they didn't realize it? I mean,
well,
my thing is there is throughout our history, there are perfect storms of holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Where you're like, I put this in place, but it failed. I put that in place, but it failed. I put this in place, but it failed. And what if this series of extremely unfortunate events was actually taking place? He thinks he's doing everything by the book. He thinks he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. He thinks he's saving the day. But the mask isn't working. Something failed. He's out of his gourd and he doesn't even realize it. So he's flying him off into the middle of the ocean without realizing. He thinks he's getting him home.
Yeah. I would say in that case, though, you would still have the presence of mind to make some radio calls before it
Call
got
somebody.
too late.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
So I would think
Yep.
there would be some radio transmission saying, "Hey, we've got a problem. I'm trying to fix it."
SOS. Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Well, and the other thing, I mean, not to make people never want to fly again, but you think like, oh, oxygen mask, and if the bag doesn't fill, it's still flowing. You think, oh, cool, there's like this big giant oxygen tank on the plane somewhere. No, there's 10 to 12 minutes of oxygen.
Yeah.
They have 10 minutes to get below 10,000 feet before everybody dies.
Wow.
And so you're 30,000 feet, boop, seal goes. So you think you're crashing anyway.
It was like a dive.
Oh, yeah. And there's only 10 to 12 minutes because if you were at height or at elevation for that long, they pretty much want you passed the hell out anyway.
Yeah.
So it's
And
plain
I think
conspiracy theories.
in those cases, the plane would either crash a lot earlier than it did, or if the autopilot was on, it would just keep going to wherever it was programmed to go.
wouldn't bother turning.
Yeah.
There'd be no.
So I think there's still stuff that contradicts those theories too.
Right.
So let's explore the terrorist theory really quick. That these people hijacked the plane. That they weren't after. Maybe they didn't even know the chips were in the belly. They were just there to take this plane to repeat, 9/11 somewhere over China. And so he gets a hold of the plane. There's a struggle. Why are they still flying out to the middle of nowhere? Is he fighting one person off while he's flying the plane with another?
Right.
I mean, look, it's a possibility.
Yeah, I think so.
That's one of the, I mean, it's a horrible mystery and tragedy, but that's one of the greatest things about this story is that could completely
That's
be
feasible.
it.
Yeah,
Right.
he could have been like, you know what, not on my watch, and just
Yeah.
nosedive.
And the thing is, with every single one of these theories, there's always a piece of evidence that says, well, this doesn't fit that theory.
Yeah.
Right.
Every single one of them, there's something that doesn't quite line up.
So then we get to microchip kinesis KLO2 motive. So the kinesis KLO2 is the world's smallest microcontroller. 20 tech employees working for Freescale Semiconductor, the company that invented this microchip, was currently testing it, and they were all on board this flight. Drone technology using the microcontroller changed the course of the flight and left it undetectable. The flight landed in Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, and the motive was to prevent the technology from falling into the hands of Iran because it would have become a nightmare for Israel Defense Forces. Then we go to U.S. military base. This theory suggests that the flight landed at a U.S. military base in Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Then we have the life insurance scam that suggests someone on board the flight had bought a huge sum of life insurance and wanted the family to gain from it. But in the investigative reports, I don't know how much they went into the 239
Passengers. They just checked out the crew.
They just checked out the crew. But so the passenger then, in theory, hijacked the plane to die in the plane to get money to the family. I mean, that's pretty out there. And then pilot suicide theories claim that the captain of the plane hijacked it and was on a suicide mission after his wife left him. I couldn't find that anywhere else.
And the thing is, with a pilot suicide, typically they get the job done. They don't hang around for 7 hours.
Right, yeah. They're not going to fly around until we run out of fuel.
Yeah, so that doesn't fit that.
But the craziest thing is in the flight path itself. So, I mean, essentially, they leave Kuala Lumpur, flying towards China, and then just come completely down, back across Malaysia and out in to the middle of the ocean, Indian Ocean, Andaman Sea, Indian Ocean area. They searched that whole thing. I mean, like, extensively. There was even an American based research company, Oceanic Research Company, that put their own money out there because they're like, we can find it.
Yeah, and they didn't.
After 3 or 4 months, they call it off. They're like, there's nothing.
Well,
Nothing.
I will say this. When it comes to finding things like that, it's much more difficult in the ocean than what people think. Even to find the Titanic, you know, where we had a pretty good idea of where it was. When the individual who found that, his team searches for debris fields. And I heard him tell the story once. He said it's a lot like walking in a very high wheat field where there's been an accident, but you don't know where. He said, so as you walk through this wheat field, you might find an object here or an object over here. He said, so then now you've got a starting point. And then you just kind of got to try and find where does the debris take you from here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you basically go in circles around this piece of debris until you find another piece of debris and then another piece of, okay, now I'm on the trail, because we know how when things sink, it's leaving stuff behind.
Right.
And so essentially you're following this debris trail like a shark does with blood, right? It's hitting that scent until you actually find the object. If this thing were to hit the ocean, it obviously would have exploded into 1,000 pieces. Not vaporized by any means, but and then sink.
It had broken apart for sure. Yeah.
What was the weather like? Does anybody remember off the top of their head?
There was no significant weather.
No
in
significant
the area.
weather event. So this thing would have hit the ocean, and even a calm ocean is not actually calm. We're lake people. When we think of a calm water, we actually see calm water. But the ocean's always moving, and the waves are huge. So it would have driven that thing down, and who knows how deep it would have gone.
Right.
But one object, up onto the African shore. How many months later?
Oh, it was like a year later almost.
Yeah. Okay. So this thing's out there floating in the ocean for a year.
But so if that piece tears off and if this thing breaks open, bodies float.
Not for very long.
After time.
Not only that, you're in the Indian Ocean. You're organic. The world itself is actually designed to get rid of that.
Right.
In the Atlantic, there's not a whole lot of predators because it's colder water. So I would imagine, the crabs are what got the people on the Titanic or those types of wrecks.
Right.
But in the Indian Ocean, it's warm. There's probably sharks all over the place. Organic material wouldn't last very long. It would be gone fairly quickly, I would imagine.
Right.
My thing, though, is just during that search, they would have, I would think, been able to see something. I mean, not everything on that plane is going to sink.
No,
Right.
something's
If it
going
shatters,
to float.
there's going to be life jackets.
And
There's
that's
going to
kinda-
be...
That's the thing. Like I was looking it up. Air France 447, another plane that crashed into the ocean. It took 2 years to find that plane, and they knew where it was when it went down.
Right.
With
See,
pretty
yeah.
reasonable
Yeah.
accuracy.
So, I mean, it's difficult to find something in the ocean. This is a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
And probably even beyond that, this is a needle in a haystack that's on top of a mountain somewhere. And you're going up there to search by yourself. This is a huge, monumental task.
Yeah, and that search area is just a guess, and it's based off those satellite pings, which put it somewhere along this large arc.
He could have turned how many different times before
And that's
just...
that's the thing though, is the last known position on the flight path is because then it went out of radar contact essentially. So they could have made another 180-degree turn and headed way south or way north or back to where they came. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't know.
They could have been floating on the surface for weeks, and we would have never been able to find them.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. What else I mean...
Those are
Those are the
top
key theories that they're really
12
looking at.
Theories of what happened. Again, I mean, I love alien abduction, but
It's the number one theory you had there.
It is, yeah. I really think it was either hijacking or possibly the hypoxia, but I have a hard time with that because being in that, going through I mean, they didn't lose radio contact. They didn't, I mean, there's all
He
these
didn't call
just
for help.
weird situations and those calls, good night, like what the hell?
And I think that good night is a pretty standard handoff. Hey, we're leaving
Yeah.
your airspace. Good night. We're on to
It's
our
just
next.
creepier now.
Yeah. It's just in the context where that's the last words that we heard from them.
Right.
That makes it kind of creepy.
And
But I think
why?
that's standard.
Why
stuff.
is that the last? And then there's reports of there was an oil rig worker dude that was like, I saw a plane and it was on fire. And then there was some gal that was sailing in the Indian Ocean by herself that was like, oh yeah, I saw a big explosion. And it's like, did you? Because was it that or was it a comet? Because there's nothing out there. There was no debris.
Yeah.
They've found 20 pieces purportedly from the plane on various parts of different continents. But again, well, we think it was. Oh no, it was. Which is it? you spent all this time and money on these reports, have some consistency in it. I don't know. I don't know. This is one of those ones where I'm like, God, I don't know. And any theory is just as valuable as the next, I think.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the one that makes the most sense in my mind is, I don't know who it would be, the captain, somebody else. It had to be somebody that knew that airplane very well and knew the airspace very well, based on the stuff that we do know where it was flying. It was deliberately avoiding contact and staying out of established air travel lanes to avoid conflicting with other traffic. And I think it points to somebody deliberately trying to just vanish, is what it looks like to me. In the last 10 years since we've had because those pings actually were discovered pretty early on, and that's how they determined the search area. There's been some more information added to that, and it's they call it WSPR, W-S-P-R. It's weak signal propagation reporting. And what they do is they have millions of amateur radio transmissions, and when these transmissions hit something like an aircraft, it disturbs that transmission and causes an anomaly in that. And they log all these anomalies and use algorithms. And with that kind of stuff, you can create almost a poor man's primary radar and kind of say, okay, where there was an anomaly here, there was an anomaly here. You can kind of start to build a path of where these objects are. And you can kind of sort of track aircraft with that. And this data goes back to 2008, I think, which was before this incident occurred. So there's a lot of data out there that they've been able to churn through. And by looking at all this stuff, they've come up with a flight path that pretty much matches the radar contact until the radar contact was lost, and then also coincides with the satellite pings, matches up, but it fills in some of those gaps in between. And also, talking about the satellite pings, they occur every hour if nothing else happens. But there's like an hour and 17-minute gap where nothing happens. It had to have been powered down during that time and then powered back up in order to start responding to the pings again. And the first ping that it gets again is a handshake, but it had some weird frequency shift thing that it got discarded as being invalid. That also indicates that it was just recently powered on, because it's a heat stabilized crystal that makes the timing really accurate. But it takes a moment for that thing to get up to temperature. And so that first log on attempt was at a low temperature, possibly. That could be one of those things. And then the last one was also a log on attempt from the aircraft, not from the ground or from the satellite, which also indicates that some power thing had changed, like the engines had flamed out and the APU was kicking on because the engines had flamed out. So it all indicates that, that there was, it flew until it ran out of fuel, which kind of rules out a lot of the deliberate, attempts of, crashing it or something like that. Why wait that long?
Why wait?
Right.
It kind of rules out the hypoxia thing based on the flight path, because if they had passed out, it would just continue on its autopilot path or crash pretty much right after that, with nobody flying it. So filling in those gaps a little bit, they can determine in between those pings, the pilot is flying almost on like a zigzag course, whoever's flying the plane, kind of going from one waypoint to the next, like pointing at this waypoint, pointing at this waypoint, but also trying to avoid the established air traffic lanes, which means you're trying to not be seen and not run into conflict with other aircraft. Also, before the last ping, they think it might have been flying in a sort of a figure 8 pattern.
Wow.
Which we don't have any altitude or speed information or anything like that. But this was like before the last ping. So what's going on there? Are they looking for something out there in the ocean? Or are they just trying to see that there's nothing there? Are they just killing time? I don't know. That's a weird thing. But it kind of fills in those gaps in between those pings. But it all coincides with it going down somewhere in the ocean after it ran out of fuel. Did they try to land it as smoothly as possible, or did they crash down in?
Right.
There's
We'll
no way
never
of knowing
know.
that. Until we find the plane itself, we're not going to have those answers.
I think, and maybe one day we will. These things are built out of sturdy stuff. Maybe one day we'll come across it. Maybe decades from now.
And here's the thing, I don't think whoever was flying the plane knew those pings were going on. If we didn't have that information, they would have basically vanished after radar contact was lost.
Right.
And so if your plan was to just disappear, I think that's the way you would carry it out. It's about as good as a job you could do if you wanted to just disappear. I think that's how you would do it. If we didn't have those pings, we wouldn't have any idea where that plane ended up. The only reason we're looking where we're looking is because of that information.
It's very possible that the hijack took place and the captain, knowing what he knows, started shutting things down. Maybe he believed, if I misdirect them, if I take them off course, if I tell them to go that way, if I lie to them and get them to go out to the middle of the ocean, no one else will be hurt.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's what he did. So maybe there was a hijacking situation, a theft situation, or an espionage situation that was going on.
Some sort of hostile takeover
The
attempt.
captain understood what was happening. He wasn't going to allow it to happen on his watch. So he basically started shutting things down, misdirecting these individuals into believing that he was helping them,
Flying
or
them
assisting,
to where they wanted to go.
where he had made the decision.
And I mean, you think
we're
about
all,
it's after 1 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
You're out over a dark ocean, dark sky. If you're making big, lazy figure eights, nobody's probably going to pick up on.
Yeah.
We're not going.
We're not
Unless the
going
hijackers had that kind of knowledge about airspace and stuff like that, they
Right.
wouldn't have any.
They
clue.
wouldn't have any idea.
Yeah.
And so it's quite possible that they were trying to do whatever, and the captain misled them to the point, and fully knowing, we're all gone anyway.
Right.
I'm just going to make sure that they're
I'm
not
just
going to
make
hurt,
sure that there's no fuel left in this thing for them to go where they
that
want
they
to
hurt
go.
anybody else.
Mhm.
And so he could have misdirected them down to somewhere else.
I think you just cracked it.
Because, well, I mean, if you really think about it, and it's just another theory, but if I was a captain in that situation, 9,000 hours behind the plane, you said, whoever did this knew the plane.
Mhm.
Whoever did this knew how to avoid these certain things. Maybe he, because he knows that the ping's going on. He knows that this is being recorded somehow. But, they may have been like, how to avoid things, but they didn't bother covering all their bases, so they don't know the ping's happening. And they're like, okay, so I'm going to take over your plane. I'm going to fly it. And the captain's like, okay, but do you guys know where you're going?
Right.
Well, let me help you out.
Yeah.
Go that way. Do a 180. We need to go this way. We need to go that way. And he just got them the hell out there as far as he could to just stop anything else from happening.
It's as good a theory
Yeah.
as any other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And it could be that situation where this guy saved how many different people, and we'd never know.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think that one, that he was a hero somehow, instead of being like, I'm going to vanish or
Right.
suicide.
Right. And
What
take all these innocent people.
And take
with
all
me.
these innocent.
Yeah.
What if he was like, I'm going to stop, the Chinese 9/11 from happening. I'm not going to allow it. Could have happened. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. Until we find the plane, we're not going to get any more answers. And
Well-
even if we do find the plane, there's only limited data we can get from that.
Yeah.
The flight data recorders, the CVRs, they're not going to contain anything because
No.
whatever happened well before they would have.
And I mean, it's if it's in the ocean, it's been there for a decade.
Yeah. If
that
they're
stuff's
even
going to be shot.
Yeah, and they only. I think the copy voice recorder only recorded like the last half hour of activity, which at that point probably not much was going on. So.
Yeah. And if he was shutting things down, he would have left that going. But
True,
everything
to-
else,
to
he may have
leave
been
a-
like, you know
yeah.
what? I'm just going to slowly kill us. I'm just going to slowly shut things down. They're not going to know any different, and we're going to get out of here. We're going to save as many people as we can. That's my theory. Because, I mean, it doesn't really line up with anything else. Everyone wants to say aliens because that's where we go, right? When we can't explain things.
Aliens and the CIA, they're both the fall guys.
Yeah,
CIA,
yeah. Whenever you've got that many anomalies, that's always the that's
power
always
of
the-
God, whatever.
Yep.
We just come up with whatever we can, pull something out of the sky because we need an explanation. And there's so much about this that we just will never, ever know.
No idea.
Yeah. So one theory is as good as the other. And if those individuals were abducted, which, as we've all shared, none of us here believe that, that's 239 individuals that I hope are living the good life, in on some alien planet
Planet Serpo.
where all they got to do is just, I don't know, contribute culturally or whatever. Who knows? But, yeah. If you like this program, go ahead, give us a like, subscribe. I want to thank Grant. And if you've got your own theory, let us know in the comments below.
Oh, I'd love to hear some
I'd
others.
love to hear what other people think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I wish it was aliens, but man, I it's just as good as anything else.
Yeah.
I don't believe the video. I will tell you.
No,
that.
yeah, I don't. I think
I could get on board with aliens abducted the aircraft, but that video was not it.
No, and spy satellite video doesn't just show up. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I wish there was unlimited money and motivation to keep searching for it.
Yeah,
right.
It's the only way that we're ever going to get any more answers.
Agreed. You've been watching Jackalopes Explore. God damn it!